This show is a part of the podcast network of the Walled Garden Philosophical Society, an international community of philosophers and seekers dedicated to the pursuit of truth, wisdom, virtue, and the divine, wherever they may be found. To find out more, go to thewalledgarden.com. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Soul Searching with Seneca. Now, this is part 2 of a few episodes that I'm doing on Seneca's 8th letter. So if you haven't heard part 1, please go back and listen to that because it's very important that you do so so that you'll understand what we're talking about in this episode. But basically what we're discussing is Seneca's letter number 9 and his thoughts on the Stoic sage. What is the wisest person? What do they look like? How do they live their lives? And a nice way that I might summarize what we learned from the previous episode in Seneca's writings before the ones that we're focusing on today is that the sage is somebody who is able to endure the trials and the hardships and the losses of life with equanimity because he or she finds pathways to goodness, finds pathways for giving goodness, and in return receives that reflected back upon their soul, right? There's this idea of the superiority of the soul and that there is these pathways that lead to the nourishment of that soul. And when the soul is nourished, and when you give the goodness that comes from the wellspring that lies within your soul, the wellspring of virtue and goodness, then those things flow back to you as well in certain ways. And there are a couple of things that I thought about that might help you to even grasp this idea even more fully, right? The first one, I want to give you this quote from Heraclitus. Now, some of you may know that Heraclitus was a pre-Socratic philosopher who very much influenced the philosophy of the Stoics, right? Because he was one of the first, I guess he was the first person to conceptualize this idea of the logos, which is the divine spark which lies within us, which enables us to mediate between the chaos and order of our lives, right? And one of the things that he said in his kind of wisdom poetry, very interesting, he said, "If everything were turned to smoke, the nose would be the seat of judgment. Thus, in the abysmal dark, the soul is known by scent." There's an interesting idea in those lines, right? That there are many pathways to understanding the soul. There are pathways to bringing that awareness of the soul, that attention of the soul back within ourselves, right? And so if you lose your sight, the nose becomes the seat of judgment, or the ears become the seat of judgment, And this is a similar kind of idea to that of the Stoic sage, right, that Seneca was talking about. If you lose a friend, there are still many pathways that can lead you to the benefits of friendship. There are still many pathways that can allow you to plant the seeds of equivalent goods that can come out of that tragedy, right? And this is not to say that the sage is happy to lose a friend, right? It's an unsophisticated way of looking at this. It is to say that the sage looks for opportunities to make good of life, to find the good in life, and he often does that by giving the goodness that springs forth from his soul. Right, and there's another idea that I wanted to give you that I think really perfectly portrays this idea, right? And it actually comes from Miles Davis, the famous trumpeter. Now, he in his interviews, he would be sitting there drawing, right? And he'd be doing these beautiful pencil drawings. Such an artistic, brilliant mind, right? And one of the interviewers, asked him, "Hey, what happens when you make a mistake? What happens when you draw an incorrect line, right?" And Miles kind of looked at him strangely and said, "What do you mean mistake? There's no mistakes." I'm paraphrasing here, but he essentially said there's no mistakes because the line that you draw next makes the line that you thought was a mistake right. Right? So you correct the line that seems wrong by drawing the next line. And that's a brilliant idea. That is the Stoic sage right there. If something bad happens in your life, or that you perceive to be bad, or if something tragic happens, it's not the thing that has happened that really leads to you feeling a certain way. It's the thing that you do next. It's the pathway that you find next to bring about goodness that is going to lead to the equanimity that the sage might feel in their life, going through these various trials. It's not about what's happening now. It's about what it is that you're doing next in order to plant the seeds of goodness. And so anyway, like I said, go back and listen to the previous episode, but that's all I'm going to say on that topic for now. I'm going to dive into what Seneca said next. And he said the following, quote, "Let us now return to the question. The wise man, I say, self-sufficient though he is, nevertheless desires friends if only for the purpose of practicing friendship, in order that his noble qualities may not lie dormant. Not, however, for the purpose mentioned by Epicurus in the letter quoted above, that there may be someone to sit by him when he is ill, to help him when he is in prison or in want, but that he may have someone by whose sickbed he himself may sit, someone a prisoner in hostile hands whom he himself may set free. He who regards himself only, and enters upon friendships for this reason, reckons wrongly. The end will be like the beginning. He has made friends with one who might assist him out of bondage. At the first rattle of the chain, such a friend will desert him. These are the so-called fair-weather friendships. One who is chosen for the sake of utility will be satisfactory only as long as he is useful. Hence, prosperous men are blockaded by troops of friends, but those who have failed stand amid vast loneliness, their friends fleeting from the very crisis which is to test their worth. Hence also we notice those many shameful cases of persons who, through fear, desert or betray. The beginning and the end cannot but harmonize. He who begins to be your friend because it pays to do so, will also cease to be your friend because it pays. A man will be attracted by some reward offered in exchange for his friendship, if he be attracted by aught in friendship other than friendship itself. For what purpose, then, do I make a friend? In order to have someone for whom I may die, whom I may follow into exile, against whose death I may stake my own life, and pay the pledge too. The friendship which you portray is a bargain and not a friendship. It regards convenience only, and looks to the results. Beyond question, the feeling of a lover has in it something akin to friendship. One might call it friendship run mad. But though this is true, does anyone love for the sake of gain, or promotion, or renown? Pure love, careless of all other things, kindles the soul with desire for the beautiful object, not without the hope of a return of the affection. What then? Can a cause which is more honourable produce a passion that is base? End quote. Alright, so I know that there's a lot there, but I kind of want to summarize what I take away from this. And, it does have to do with the previous episode as well, but just there's this beautiful idea that what a true friendship looks like is actually not the hope to receive something in return from your friend, but it's the hope to nourish something within your own soul, a beautiful goodness within yourself, and to allow that goodness to pour out upon the friendship, right? To give the fullness of your soul to that friendship, right? And what you will receive in return, man, will be so much greater than what you would have received if you were only out for the receiving element of a friendship, to gain something from that friendship, right? And so again, we come back to this idea of the superiority of the soul. The soul is the source from which all the goodness that you receive, will spring forth, right? And so you need to recognize that what he's trying to say here is focus on the soul, focus on the goods that you need to develop within yourself. As you focus on being able to develop that goodness and to shine that out on the world, it will be reflected back at you, but it will be a more pure sense of joy, a more pure friendship, right? Because you're focusing on how you can give, not only on how you can receive. And he talks about the fact that, this is something that we all know, we've all seen it before, and, it's definitely something to watch out for. If there's a friendship that is purely based on what can I get, how can I gain from you, that's a friendship that doesn't last that long. But the friendship based on what can I give, What can I do to help this person? What can I do to be a good friend? How can I paint true friendship onto the canvas of my soul? That's a friendship that will last. And I like this analogy of painting the canvas of your soul. I want to play around with that a bit, because in the last episode we talked about Seneca's thoughts on how the end result of a painting, of the work of an artist, is surely sweet, right? But it's not quite as sweet as the process by which they came to it. You don't get the end result unless you first paint. You don't get the completed artwork unless you do the work and get engaged in that process of bringing about the goodness that you want to see in the world, right? And so you could look at your soul as if it is this canvas that you're supposed to paint upon. And as you paint the canvas of your soul, that goodness that you paint will be reflected back to you in your life. All right, so I'll read one more passage and then I'll probably save the rest of this letter for the next episode. I'll do a part 3. But this one here, I want to read this. It's very interesting. He says, quote, "The wise man is self-sufficient. This phrase, my dear Lucilius, is incorrectly explained by many, for they withdraw the wise man from the world and force him to dwell within his own skin. But we must mark with care what this sentence signifies and how far it applies. The wise man is sufficient unto himself for a happy existence, but not for mere existence. For he needs many helps towards mere existence. But for a happy existence he needs only a sound and upright soul, one that despises fortune. I should like also to state to you one of the distinctions of Chrysippus, who declares that the wise man is in want of nothing, and yet needs many things. On the other hand, he says, nothing is needed by the fool, for he does not understand how to use anything, but he is in want of everything. The wise man needs hands, eyes, and many things that are necessary for his daily use, but he is in want of nothing. For want implies a necessity, and nothing is necessity to the wise man. Therefore, although he is self-sufficient, yet he has need of friends. He craves as many friends as possible, not however that he may live happily, for he will live happily even without friends. The supreme good calls for no practical aids from outside. It is developed at home and arises entirely within itself. If the good seeks any portion of itself from without, it begins to be subject to the play of fortune." End quote. So I like this idea that Seneca gives us, which is a distinction between the kind of happy or flourishing existence and what he calls mere existence, right? And so he suggests that the sage has many things that he needs, and desires for mere existence, right? But for a happy existence, or the flourishing that you might expect a sage to have, he doesn't need those things for that, right? So again, he is definitely within the society. He recognizes that, let's bring it into modern terms, right? If you go to the store and you buy eggs this morning, right, there are many, many, many processes that had to happen. There are many people that you needed to do their jobs in order for you to go to the store and buy those eggs, right? And you don't see all of those things, but you definitely needed them there in order for you to go and be able to buy your eggs. Right? But the difference is, the sage recognizes that if all of that doesn't happen and he can't have eggs this morning, that's not going to be the thing that decides whether he is happy or flourishing or not, right? And I'm so sorry for that extremely superficial and lame analogy there. And I don't like using analogies like that because it definitely brings down the importance of what we're talking about here. But it's an interesting idea that Seneca gives us here. And then he kind of develops that with Chrysippus's ideas as well, which is that, the sage needs many things, right? But at the same time, for his happiness and flourishing, that is kind of a separate matter. And that is the thing that resides within the soul. That is when he goes within himself, right, in order to find the goodness that springs forth from, the seed of consciousness, the divine spark which lies within all of us, within our soul. And so again, mere existence, He needs friendship, family, people around him, society, the culture. He needs these things to add to his mere existence. But if he's thrown in jail, right, and he has none of these things, that's not going to affect his flourishing and his internal peace, right? That's going to come from within. And I really love this this passage from Chrysippus, this idea that Seneca recounts from Chrysippus, right? Which is that the sage is, the wise man is in want of nothing and yet needs many things, right? But on the other hand, nothing is needed by the fool, for he does not understand how to use anything, but he is in want of everything. And so there's this hilarious idea, which is so true, which is the wise person knows how to utilize and use the things, the gifts of fortune, the gifts of his life, the structures around him in order to amplify the goodness that comes from within himself, right? And in that way, he doesn't want anything, right? Because he has it within him and he is able to use those things around him in order to amplify that. But the fool doesn't know how to use anything, right? And so in that way, he wants everything, right? He desires everything. It's just a funny idea there. I really like that. It's a good image to have in your mind. And I guess the final thing that I want to touch on in this episode is just that last part of Seneca's account of Chrysippus's philosophy, which is that the supreme good calls for no practical aids from outside. It is developed at home and arises entirely within itself. If the good seeks any portion of itself from without, it begins to be subject to the play of fortune. Now that's a brilliant idea right there, right? So the highest possible good within your soul, the highest good that you can aim at, right, which is this flourishing from within. It doesn't need anything except that which is within itself, right? To be flourishing, to experience that eudaimonia, that state of being, right? And so the sage, the wise person, is he who finds and nourishes the goodness of life that lies within himself, the supreme good that comes from within. And in doing so, he does not want for things to happen externally to him, but he wants to change from within himself. And as he changes within himself, he gains so much more on the outer limits of his soul, right? Whereas the fool, going back to that idea, wants everything external to the good that comes within, wants all of the gifts of fortune, is tricked into thinking that those things that we are given by fortune and fate belong to us. And in that way, he doesn't see the shining good that comes from within, but he seeks everything that is without, right? And as a result, if he loses anything from without, if he loses an external good that he might have at this present time, then that affects him so much more than it would affect the sage, because the sage finds value within, which cannot be touched by fortune, and the fool finds value without, which is constantly being tormented by fortune, right? And so that's such an important idea when it comes to Stoic philosophy and also the way that Seneca looks at the world, right? We need to find that value within ourselves so that when the winds of fortune and fate come along and toss us about in our lives, we still are anchored to that pure, supreme good that we can find within ourselves, and we will not be tossed about so much by the winds of fortune. And the thing is, you'll still be able to, because you find the good within and because you cultivate the good within and you nourish it within yourself and you reflect that out upon the world, you'll be able to use the external goods that you have so much better. You'll be able to get the true value that lies within them, right? As a result of you nourishing your soul first and letting the things that are good to you flow forth from that, right? So, I have to stop here before I get even more muddled in my in my thinking, because it's such a complex subject. I just hope that I'm doing it justice in some way, right? Because there's such beautiful ideas nested within this letter, and I really want you to see this, and sometimes it's hard for me to really figure out exactly how to convey that to you, but hopefully you're seeing the common themes that are running throughout my jumbled thoughts here, and hopefully you're seeing what it is that I'm trying to convey. But anyway, I'm going to do a part 3, and I really hope you've enjoyed this and the previous episode on Seneca's 9th letter. And look, I'll talk to you next time.